it's on, and you guys, whenever you want to, it's ready to go.
How many student productions are there each year?
We do a fall musical and a spring play. We have winter workshops happening this weekend, next weekend.
And our workshops are like student-written things, or they're
They
one act?
can be, or they can be like a scene.
Yeah.
And the best thing about the winter workshops is you can have a number of students involved because they're not in a dedicated
Right.
scene.
Right.
So it's usually like 2 slates of winter workshops, and they alternate performances, which frees a lot of the kids up to attend rehearsals, like sporadically,
Yeah, yeah.
spontaneously. And then we have an instrumental concert in the winter, and other ensemble performances as well. And then we also have all of our assemblies in here, so this space gets a lot of use. Our chapels are in here, unless it's a major chapel, which is at the church. But we do use the room quite a bit.
Fantastic. And so this will, what's the seating? Are they 600?
Yeah, I think it's 608. It's actually a question in December last year. And
So is that, sorry to interrupt, but you can get the lower school and upper school in here, or that's maybe,
I
that's
think it's a
probably
little
7?
too many people.
Okay.
Yeah.
But when did it come up?
In
The
December,
capacity?
which is like we have societies and they pick teams for different society events, and one of them is December. So the 4 teams will be on stage and
Yeah.
they'll answer like a trivia question. And one of them was how many seats are in the KCCA.
Oh, that's awesome. Did and do your students give tours of campus too? That's great.
Do you guys do that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We have, I don't know what the policy is here, but at Exeter you can, I think you get 2 classes per term. That if you're totally wiped out, or you have to work with a class, you can go to the health center and rest. You're not allowed to go to the health center and like do your work. It's you're here because you need to sleep. And the kids call them fatigues. So they'll say like, I fatigued physics, meaning I didn't go, I slept. Yeah. You can only do it twice. And the kids, you know, yeah, twice per term, not per class, but 2 times total per term. And you would think that the kids might abuse that,
Yeah.
but they don't, because they also know they're missing material if they're not in class.
Right.
But I was walking out of the health center, this was probably 10 years ago, and a student was giving a tour. She said, and that's the health center. You can just go there to skip a class. And then went, you know, and kept walking. And I was like, oh, you know, I didn't want to interrupt her tour, but I said to Bill Leahy, who's the director of admissions, like, can we revise the blurb about the health center? Like, we're open 24/7, we have this many counselors, just like anything except you can skip a class there.
Yeah, there's a mandatory description of the document.
I didn't think so. I didn't think so.
Are you ready to go?
Sure, yeah.
I can probably tell you the story.
Okay.
We do have a number of people streaming from home.
Okay, great. Great, great.
You go? Anyone? Anyone see me? I don't know.
I bet if you turn this on.
It is on.
Oh, okay. Then they'll pay attention.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for joining us this evening. There are a number of you here in person, but we also have quite a few people streaming from home, so welcome to our audience who's joining us remotely as well. Thank you all so much for being here and joining us this evening for this important conversation. For those of you I haven't yet met, I'm Nicole Lewis. I'm our academic dean, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the evening. Dr. Chris Thurber is the Associate Director of Counseling and Psychological Services at Phillips Exeter Academy. He's dedicated his professional life to improving how caring adults teach and lead young people, and to enhancing the experience of adventurous young people who are spending time away from home. A graduate of Harvard University and UCLA, Dr. Thurber has served as a psychologist and instructor at Phillips Exeter Academy since 1999. He, his wife, and his 2 children live in New Hampshire. I had the pleasure of attending one of Dr. Thurber's sessions at the TABS conference in November, and I hope that you find tonight's session as interesting and as informative as I did. So without further ado, here is Dr. Thurber.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Nicole. Thank you. Thanks so much. I'm going to walk around a little bit and let Floyd adjust the volume as need be. But thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to talk about this topic. I will hope that my aging computer will cooperate. I think. We may get some flashing, but that's just to make sure you're all still awake. So anyway, Nicole, thank you for that introduction, and thank you, Nicole and Rachel, for inviting me. So we're going to talk about parental pressure, which when I have told my friends that I wrote a book with my friend Hank on parental pressure, they invariably have the same reaction, which is either I don't want to read another book on parenting, or don't be one more person telling me that I have to lower my standards because kids are under too much pressure. And I say, well, good news, you should buy a copy of my book, because that's not the thesis. You should keep your high standards. But what I'm going to try to do in this workshop is make a distinction between what healthy pressure is and what unhealthy pressure is. But first, a slide about why you should care about this in the first place. There's a good deal of research that Hank and I reviewed in preparation for writing this book, which is called The Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure, suggesting that in lots of different venues, not just academic venues, but athletic, artistic, social, that unhealthy pressure is associated with pretty poor mental health outcomes, greater instances or prevalence of anxiety and depression, a lot of procrastination, and at times even suicidal thoughts and behaviors, motivation, performance, and self-esteem go down. And it's the performance piece that surprises most people, because most parents, and I'm going to use that term broadly, any adult caregiver, so I could be talking about a teacher, a parent, a coach, clergy, mentor, relative, anyone who cares about the development of young people, which you and our virtual audience all do, or you wouldn't be here. It's important to you, and it, I think, is sort of conventional wisdom that there's a little bit of a Goldilocks principle. Too much pressure, okay, we can agree that that would be bad. Not enough pressure, and kids are going to be, wayward delinquents. But if we can get the right amount of pressure, then we will be in this sort of sweet spot, and we will enhance performance. That's the paradox, is that pressure of an unhealthy variety is associated with much worse performance. So I think I can get a lot of traction by letting people know that there is this important distinction between healthy and unhealthy pressure. And if you're interested both in better mental health and better performance from the young people you care about, whatever role or roles you play in that young person's life, then this is important material. So raise your hand if you're interested in better mental health and better performance from the young people you care about. So, all right, you can stay, good. Anyway, so this is the book, there's Hank, and not solely due to pressure, but some interesting epidemiological research collected by the CDC and other national organizations gives us, even pre-pandemic, pause. If you look at aggregated statistics for young people, so anyone under 18, increases in the last 5 or 6 years, and it's only gone up since in prevalence of anxiety and depression and behavior problems, just generally. Again, not solely due to pressure, but the work that Hank and I did and the motivation for taking a closer look at this topic very much came from a concern that is real, and that is a trend toward worse mental health in young people. So why do we have this idea that higher pressure or putting pressure on kids, thinking about it quantitatively, is beneficial? And yes, we can agree that maybe too much pressure, you can imagine, I think there would be broad agreement that too much pressure is associated with a lot of stress and anxiety that you would unnecessarily create in another person. But just thinking about it quantitatively is what turns out to be wrong. Really, we need to think about it qualitatively. But when Hank and I started doing this research, the question we asked ourselves was, well, why does everyone believe this, including us? We're both parents. That you have to get to the right amount of pressure and not go overboard. But we realized that we have these eidetic memories. We have these moments that are ingrained from our previous experience, looking at people under a great deal of pressure performing extremely well. So I'll give you an example from the 1985 NBA Finals between the Celtics and the Blazers. I live in New Hampshire, so I have to show you something from the Celtics.
DJ again to make the inbound pass. The double team at Bird. Larry, fake, fall away. Hits it at the buzzer! All right! Unbelievable. Bird gets out as far as he can go. Hits a fake, try and draw the foul. One dribble, the fall away, Hail Mary prayer, please go in shot. And there it is, folks.
If you're from New Hampshire, somebody's pronunciation or the accent saying like, hits it at the buzzer. You don't have to pronounce a final R in most words where I'm from. But those are the kinds of moments that, they're fun. They're easy to remember. And for a lot of us, not just in sports, but it feels very important. And we can all remember a time when someone performed extremely well under intense pressure. There's 1 second left in the game, and you're behind by 2, and you step outside of the three-point line and, swish the basketball. That's awesome. I mean, I think Larry Bird still remembers that moment. Is anyone else here old enough to know Larry Bird? Okay, good. And ironically, that is statistically the exception, not just in basketball, but in all sports. The NBA, if you want to stick with those statistics for a minute, defines a clutch play as any play that happens in the final 3 minutes of the game when the point difference between the winning and losing teams is 2 points or less. So very close score and near the end of the game. What are players' shooting percentages? And not just the best players, but all players. And almost without exception, there are a few exceptions, people's shooting percentage is worse in those moments. And so, what we don't remember, maybe we remember the disappointment, but typically we don't remember those, bricks against the backboard or the times when people missed the shots. We remember maybe that the team lost, but it's not ingrained in our memories as much. And probably you can think of personal experiences or maybe experiences with your students or your kids where in a high pressure situation, their performance was unbelievably wonderful. And that's awesome. And it is very unusual. So starting from this starting from this statistical observation that in high pressure situations, people's performance declines. So, okay, it makes sense though, because, there's something called the availability heuristic. In our memories, we often base generalizations on one, memorable example. A lot of times if you ask adolescents who know the facts and figures about smoking being dangerous, they would say something like, well, but my Aunt Sally lived to be 95 and she was a chain smoker. Well, that's awesome for your Aunt Sally. It doesn't prove that smoking is good for you or benign. She was very much an exception. This is very much an exception. So how should we think about pressure? And what is the distinction between healthy and unhealthy pressure? To get right to, or to state more clearly what I hope is one of the takeaway messages from this evening, it's not how much pressure, it's how it's applied. So, when I think about just, a stock photo like this that, shows a young person who looks like he or she or they is having a great time skiing, at least in the position they're in now, a novice compared to the adult who is skiing with them. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's an instructor, maybe it's an uncle, whatever it might be. In order for a complicated skill like downhill skiing, for example, to be enjoyable and not anxiety provoking, not associated with a lot of strong negative emotion, there can't be too much pressure. So yes, we can think, in rough ways about quantity, but how was this activity framed for this child? That is what turns out to be really important. So I'll give you some specific examples, put a little meat on the bones here with some case studies. So I'm going to draw a distinction between healthy and unhealthy pressure by illustrating something, in this case, outside of the academic realm. But let's look at athletics. So here's Luca, age 7. Luca's father leans over the grandstand railing to whisper in his ear. "You can see the leaderboard," he says. Luca listens as he adjusts his wrist straps. "You're a tenth of a point behind first place," the father continues. "You need at least a 9.0 on this final event to win your age group and really go somewhere with your gymnastics. High bar's your best event, so I need you to stick the landing." So, I highlighted the dialogue here in orange, and I want to ask you, what of any of these phrases feels to you like something that might qualify as unhealthy pressure? We can't quantify it. I don't know if this is a lot of pressure or a little pressure. I guess we would have to know what kind of pressure Luca is usually under, or what his dad usually says, or have some way to measure the amount of pressure. But a much more informed assessment of something like this interaction is, well, what feels healthy or unhealthy about this? Okay, so he's 7 years old in a competition, and how is, what is your idea about how the father sees, and it could be mother, it could be, but caregiver, how does the dad in this case see this competition? How is he, you're 7, so maybe you've been to some gymnastics competitions. If you started when you were 5, maybe this is your first one, but it's being framed by the adult. And maybe it's not the only adult who's framing things up, but how is it described? Needs. It's a need. Yeah. And who needs it? Well, what does the dad say? Yeah, I need you. I need you to stick the landing. So it's a need. There's some urgency around it. And it's not just about Luca. It's I need you. What else? Really go somewhere. So what's the implication there? Yeah, this isn't like, there's no even implication that this could be a little enjoyable. And most activities, whether you're talking about gymnastics or playing violin or anything else, most, not all, but most of the time it starts with the kid showing some intrinsic interest, like, oh, I want to do this, or, Billy does gymnastics, that looks like fun, or you have a trampoline in the backyard and it looks like they enjoy it. So it begins with fun, but can be quickly transformed into something else, right? What else do you see here that it's so much fun to critique other people's parenting? So just, this is a fictitious person, so go for it. What do you, I was so glib when I was childless. My boys are now 18 and 20, but yeah, I was the parent who would wheel my cart through the grocery store, and kids are always decompensating in like the cereal aisle or next to the candy display, right? and just having these like knockdown, drag out temper tantrums, and I'm still shopping and not staring, but thinking like, that's never going to be my kid. And then I had kids. And so yes, it's there's nothing more humbling. But what else do you see here that is concerning? Uh-huh. Yeah. Right, so it's not just high stakes, like winning is important because otherwise, like this is connected to your whole future. You're going to go somewhere with your gymnastics, you have to win. And it's not just high stakes, but very narrow. Like it depends on this one thing. What else? Yeah, well, and maybe if I didn't either. And, if you've done gymnastics for a couple of months, which maybe you have, if now you're in some sort of competition, you kind of get the scoring system. But here's a question related to that. The dad says, you can see the leaderboard. This is probably a true statement. And if this is, a competitive meet, whatever it is, what you did understand when you were 7 was first place, second place, third place. Yeah. Do you think Luca has looked at the leaderboard? And in gymnastics, it usually is posted. Gymnastics is one of those sports where as soon as your event is done, you get judged by 3 people you don't know and get a score in front of everybody. So it's different. It's pretty public, right? But if it were a swim meet, you can see who touches the wall first and who comes in second. And if it was close, you're going to look at the times. But as a competitor, my guess is that Luke has seen the leaderboard. And that's what his father is also thinking, which is why he says, you can see the leaderboard. But think back to your own childhood. When your parents told you things you already knew, how do you react? You're too young to be a parent. Yeah. Well, several important things in what you said. Thank you. One is that, and you hinted at this too, and I'm not sure this is the right time for all of this dialogue anyway. Like you said, if he's about to compete in an event, maybe just let him focus. But as parents, we often can't resist the last minute pep talk, right? Am I the only one who can't resist that? A few other people can't resist? Okay, maybe I'm the only one. So I think this is typical parent behavior, but importantly, what you said is he doesn't realize he's doing this. And this is another important thing to recognize about pressure. Loving, well-intentioned parents do this thing that works at cross purposes to their goal for their kids, which is, why I'm so adamant about sharing my findings in this research and why I decided to co-author a book on it. It's instinctive to set expectations for our kids. We want their future to be good. The dad wants Luca to improve. He wants him to do well. That's great, and to get better after this competition if there are things he can work on. But again, important in what you said was he doesn't realize he's doing it, and we don't, until you come to a workshop like this or have somebody, or maybe your child gives you feedback, but that's also unusual. It is instinctive, and you can't not apply pressure. So again, keep your standards high, keep the pressure there, but think about how you're going to modulate it, because when it is framed as very high stakes, when it is narrowed down, your definition of success, now it's advancing without my even doing anything. Let's go back. Wow, you got a preview of the whole thing. First of all, it only adds to anybody's anxiety to tell them something they already know. So this would be good feedback for the dad. You can see the leaderboard. But by drawing attention to the leaderboard rather than something else, emphasizing something else, whether Luca understands a tenth of a point or not, the dad has emphasized, the ordinal ranking of things. You're not in first place. You're a tenth of a point behind first place. So the high stakes, the narrowing of the definition of success, stating the obvious is obnoxious, but I'm sure it adds to Luca's anxiety, but may not qualify as a kind of pressure, healthy or unhealthy. But you identified all the things that Hank and I did, in our research. If we compare this to a different dad, a different kid, across the gym, Luca's rival Abeo is getting a pep talk from his father. "I'm impressed, son," the father says as Abeo adjusts his wrist straps. "Your concentration and effort have earned you 2 personal bests today. Now give it everything you've got on this final event. Work hard to stay focused, especially during your kip. High bar's your best event, so let's see you stick the landing." Now, I wrote these case studies very carefully. This is the exact same number of words as the previous example. And I made it also a dad and a son, but again, the configuration of the family doesn't matter so much as the same number of words that get communicated. What do you see that's different here? And I would classify this, when it reappears, as healthy pressure, not unhealthy pressure. And we'll set aside our judgment about whether it makes any sense at all in a situation like this for a parent to be giving their kid a pep talk. That may not be, that may have been appropriate on the drive to the event, but as you pointed out, this is maybe a time to let your kid concentrate, and the reason there are stands is so that the parents can sit up there and not be, down on the gym floor. So what do you see here that strikes you as better form, better expression of, a different emphasis? And is it about placement or something else? What's it about? Right. Good, right. The emphasis is on effort rather than outcome. And we all care about the outcome. And I'm not saying don't care about the outcome. How could you not care about the outcome? But far more important than outcome is focusing on effort. And a far more skillful way to ensure a better outcome is by not emphasizing the outcome. Does that make sense? But it's just not intuitive, right? You want your kids to get first place, you talk about first place. Only the more you talk about first place, the more likely it is that your child is going to get second place or last place. So the emphasis on the child's personal qualities, as you said, your concentration and effort. Sorry, we've got some sort of HDMI cable fluctuation, or my old computer's just deciding this would be a really good time to be unreliable. But there we go. Encouragement to work hard and stay focused. These are things that are achievable. Without any emphasis on the outcome and staying very personal, we're not narrowing down the definition of success, and there's nothing in here that makes it connected to anything in the future, right? It doesn't seem like a particularly high stakes sort of deal, which is really, really healthy. So, to say all that in different, sorry, I'm going to try, Floyd, unplugging the HDMI cable and plugging it back in and see if we get a slightly better, hang on just one sec. Except it's not, because I travel with my own HDMI cable. So, but it's quite possible. In fact, I'm quite certain that it's my computer, not anything that has to do with STEM, but we are going to try another cable just for giggles. Sure. Yeah. So what's really important about what you just said is it's an illustration of high standards in both cases. Again, we can say lots about the appropriateness of the last minute pep talk. But given that these are both last minute pep talks, let's compare them. And when the emphasis here is on effort and concentration and achieving some personal best, and that's what Abeo is getting praise for, you've gotten 2 personal bests today. And even if he hadn't gotten 2 personal bests, just to say, your focus and concentration have been excellent. P.S., if his focus and concentration have not been excellent, don't say that. I mean, right? The worst you can do, your kids will instantly know whether you're lying to them or not. And again, even if this is a new competitor, I'm sure that he's aware of, I didn't quite stick the landing, or I didn't do that as well as I had hoped, or, because there's been practice leading up to this, even if it's just a month of practice. So, being able to offer a broad definition of success and emphasizing that you want kids to be their best, not the best, is such an important distinction. You do not need to lower your standards. You do not need to expect less. In fact, if you're going to get upset because your child is not putting forth the effort they've put forth in the past or they're capable of, you should say that. Honest feedback is really important. But for purposes of comparison, anyway, to put that, in a sort of text way, pressure parents, and we're all pressure parents some of the time, focus on narrow outcomes. They frame the outcomes as high stakes, over-personalizing the child's success. And I'm sure you caught that, but let's see you stick the landing sounds different than I need you to stick the landing, right? And of course we're involved in our kids' lives. It's our job as parents, as teachers, as coaches, as caregivers. But when you say, I need you to do this, it suggests to me the high likelihood that parent is over-involved. Like, if I don't stick the landing, it's not just that I will be disappointed, my parent will be disappointed. Like, their happiness rests on my performance. And yes, we live to some degree vicariously through our students, through our own children, through the kids we care about. And, we feel joyful when they succeed. We can be disappointed with them when they fail. And we don't want to give the impression that somehow our life is going to end if their performance isn't top drawer. You had a question or a comment? Which comment? Which comment can negatively affect things?
This comment can negatively affect during the competition because a child knows that he has to do his best in that, and he will give all his strengths and everything he can to do
Right.
the best. But the parent is giving him some type of bright star that he has to know that he has to do it. So he's putting negative energy.
Well, I agree.
If he doesn't do it good, he starts to think about that. If he doesn't do it good, he's thinking about the consequence of that. It's not the concentration anymore.
Right. If you feel like the consequence is you lost your concentration or you need to practice this skill more, you may be disappointed in your performance, but you have something to work for, and you don't feel like someone you love is devastated because of, your performance. On the other hand, if you feel like the stakes are really high, you gotta win if you want to go somewhere in your gymnastics, and I need this, then you feeling a lot of unhealthy pressure. And again, in both cases, the pre-event pep talk may be poorly placed. You also had a, yeah. Can you think of it maybe, I mean, I'm open to thinking about that, but I think that at least we looked at a lot of cross-cultural research. Parents in every culture state expectations for their kids. This is how I want you to develop, and that I think is healthy pressure. That's the part that is instinctive. It's all then. It all moves through lenses of our personal history, lenses of culture, lenses of whatever formal education we have, and so it can come out in different ways. But do you think that there are cultures where stating expectations for your kids is not something that parents do? Yeah, the tremendous variation in the way they do it, absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. So I would say whether the dominant kind of parental pressure is healthy or unhealthy, we could paint it with a broad brushstroke, varies by culture or subculture. Yeah, yeah, thank you. So, we can contrast this with, support parents, if you want to have a simplistic way of putting parents into two categories. But again, like all of us are both of these at different times. You just want to spend as much time in the support parent category as you can. Describe a range of opportunities. So what might be, instead of saying you got to win this if you want to go somewhere with your gymnastics, how might any parent in a situation like this before a competition lay out a range of possibilities for success? Like what, and I'm not fishing for a particular answer here because there are many possible answers, but what might this parent say, let's imagine on the way to the competition or driving you to the SAT or whatever it might be, where performance matters? How are you going to frame that in a way that lays out a range of opportunities? This is where it gets challenging because you're like, okay, I get unhealthy pressure, bad one, but now, like, how are you going to do the healthy pressure? What other opportunities, for example, does Luca have besides winning and quote unquote really going somewhere with his gymnastics? Yeah, yeah. Right. It is one among many competitions, or it's not the only test you're going to take. And there are some exceptions. In China you can take the Gaokao once, but most of the time, these sort of competitive, evaluative sorts of things are not your only opportunity to shine, right? And so, say this is a snapshot, and you've worked hard for 6 months, and you're going to do the best you can today, and remember, there's 4 more meets this season, or whatever else it might be. What could the parent say to emphasize effort more than outcome? Yeah, and you can throw that in there, might as well, right? And have fun. I mean, it should be. Human beings do their best work in anything when we're happy. And if we lose sight of that and the joy of, yes, it can be the NBA Finals. And maybe, your salary rides on whether you're the championship team or not, or if you get drafted to another team or something like that. But again, the outcome is always better when your mental health is better. And that is a reliable fact. What about, instead of over-personalizing the child's success, what are some other ways you can say, be your best rather than be the best? And you did give us one example of, you've been working on this for 6 months. Go out there and, give it your best shot, as this second dad does. In what other ways do you as parents explicitly say that what makes you proud or what your child should be proud of is being the best they can be, being their best self, and make it clear that they don't have to be the valedictorian or win the blue ribbon or come in first place or have the highest score in order to be loved?
Every day I take my son to the school bus. When he gets out of the car, I always tell him just to make the most of your day.
That's great.
Whatever that might be.
Right? And you're saying it to him, so it's for him to make the most of it, whatever happens that day. Yeah, that's a really good example. I haven't talked a lot about over control or what is age appropriate control, but another kind of unhealthy pressure. Certainly give you an example from the school where I work. This was long before I started thinking about this topic or the book. But most of what I do, as Nicole mentioned in her introduction, is work as a clinician, as a clinical psychologist at, like Sam, it's a combination boarding and day school. We have about 1,050 students, about 80% boarders. And a student about a decade ago, well, maybe about 8 years ago, sort of slumped down in the chair in my office. And I begin all sessions the same way. I ask kids, what's the best thing that's happened since the last time we met? No matter what their countenance is. And she said, I can't think of anything. And I usually don't take that for an answer. I just wait until they can think of something. And I forget what she mentioned, but it was something trivial, like, well, they had ice cream for dessert at, in the dining hall. I said, okay, that's good. And then I said, there's something else on your mind today. And she said, well, I got the results of my physics test. And I said something like, I'm guessing it wasn't the result you wanted. She said, actually, I did okay. I got a 95. And I said, that's better than okay in my estimation. And she said, well, it wasn't so much that, it was how I found out. And I said, well, how did you find out? I was pretty sure there was only one way to find out, which is from your physics teacher. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, but right? And she said, well, I'm walking across the quad, and another student in my class said, you got a 95. And I said, this is the student talking, how do you know that? Well, the grades are posted on Canvas, which is, the online, sort of course management system we have. And the student said to me, well, I asked the student then, but wait, you only have access to your Canvas account. How's somebody in your class able to see your grade? And the student said, well, she wasn't. But her mom has access to her account and shared it with the other moms in the chat group. And not just shared it with the other moms, but told her daughter, another student, well, Beatrice got a 95. How come you only got a 92? And so this girl who felt bad about getting a 92 then said to the girl who got a 95 that, essentially she felt resentful of that. And it really, the grades didn't matter. It was the over-controlling context in which, it felt really age inappropriate to this 15-year-old that parents were demanding, in this case, access by using their kid's username and password to, access their grades and, spread it around. And then she was, this one student was finding out about her grade in a very circuitous and socially awkward way, with a lot of comparison. And that puts a lot of unhealthy pressure on kids. So I say age-appropriate control because, we supervise and monitor 3-year-olds different than we do 13-year-olds, different than we do 18-year-olds. But we have to check ourselves sometimes. All right, let's look at another case example. On Saturday morning, Ruth is packing for a standardized test. She puts pencils and her registration ticket in her backpack. You know how important this test is, says her parent. Here's another, stating the obvious. Kids hate this, am I right? Thanks for the reminder, says Ruth. Sorry, replies her parent. It's just that so much is riding on this one score. If you do really well, you'll get chances I never got. So you see here all the hallmarks of unhealthy pressure. Over-personalization, a narrow definition of success, very high stakes, and again, stating the obvious. If you contrast that with, the same scenario, and the parent says, this is another chance to shine, right? Where the implication is, well, some things you've done in the past are awesome, some maybe are not your best, but this is another chance to shine. Suddenly you're broadening out the idea of opportunities for success. Still the same snarky response from the teenager. Thanks for the reminder. Sorry, replies her parent. You've prepared as much as you can. I know you'll do your best. Very similar to what you suggested. The emphasis here on on effort rather than on outcome, and on being, doing the best you can do rather than being the best, and not high stakes and over-personalizing it. I think many parents, if not most or all parents, want their kids to have opportunities that they may not have had. That's wonderful, that's great, and generationally, that's a recipe for, species progression. However, if you feel like you hold the future of the species in your hands as you sit down to take the standardized test, not just try to get as many questions right as you can, your performance is going to be worse. So, if these are identical twins, monozygotic twins with identical upbringings, which never happens, but let's just imagine as a thought experiment, and they have the same intellectual capacity, and they get, different pep talks from one parent as they do from another, I can tell you with great reliability who's going to score better. And it's not a reflection of their intellectual capacity as much as it is their experience of unhealthy levels of anxiety related to a dose of unhealthy pressure. So here comes something appealing to the physicists in the audience. Pressure is a force, yes, but think about taking a introductory ballroom dancing class. Okay, and let's say that you don't know how to ballroom dance, but this is going to be fun, and your sibling's getting married or something. So you want to learn how to ballroom dance, and you go with a friend or partner, spouse, whatever. At some point, because you're a novice ballroom dancer, you step on your partner's foot. You put your heel down on the top of their foot because you're trying to do some fancy rumba move or something like that. If you're wearing tennis sneakers, the force of your mass accelerating in a certain way and landing on a certain spot, it's not going to feel good to have, your foot stepped on. But it's going to hurt a lot more if you get stepped on with a stiletto, because that same mass is now, that same force is concentrated on a much smaller area. And this is the difference between healthy and unhealthy pressure. You're still ballroom dancing, you still have these high standards. But in one instance, the application of that pressure is going to impair performance. So if all the words didn't make sense, maybe that picture will. I'll give you another example. I had fun making some animations just with some of my friends and their kids. These are slightly longer examples, but want to give you a little more practice and then happy to take more questions. In this case, the dad is admonishing his kid for writing a really perfunctory thank you note. We can imagine maybe this child, got a birthday present and they're writing a thank you note, or they're writing a note maybe to a prospective employer or something like that. The point is, it's a handwritten note that doesn't meet the parent's standards. Again, don't lower your standards, but listen to the two different ways this parent can communicate what he would like this child to do. I said at the beginning, it's not about being a laissez-faire kind of parent and letting your kid do whatever they want or taking pressure totally out of the equation, but I think you can hear the contrast. Maybe you can hear the contrast. Let me pause this. It was working so well when we tested it out. All right, we're going to try this again.
Come on, Dad. Do I really have to rewrite this thank you note?
Yes, you need to rewrite this thank you note. Look, your printing is messy, it's way too short, and you haven't personalized it at all. This is your one and only chance to distinguish yourself from the other kids who interviewed for this job.
Come on, Dad. Do I really have to rewrite this thank you note?
Listen, when I get a thank you note, it feels more meaningful when the handwriting is neat and the person mentions something specific that they're grateful for. You can make a more positive impression if you took the time to rewrite this.
So, in both cases here...
Mom, why is everyone
Let me
always
just
talking
pause
about
this.
applying to Ivy League schools?
In both cases, the parent was displeased with the quality of the thank you note that the child had written, right? The standards remain high, but in one case saying, it's your one and only opportunity, and there are other kids who are going to do a better job. Yes, this child's going to rewrite the thank you note. And it's easy as a parent to walk away from a situation like that thinking, oh, that's good, right? Like high standards, and I told them, this matters. But they're going to write an even better revised thank you note in the second instance because the parent, who, again, has those same high standards, is saying, listen, when I get a thank you note, people mention specifics or it's handwritten or it's neat, that makes me feel like the person really cares. Not an emphasis on one definition of success, not an emphasis on a narrow outcome. And this is where, this takes practice. But if you listen to how you're framing the encouragement, the praise, the questions, and the criticisms that you're offering your child, and replay it in your mind, check yourself. Am I framing this narrowly? Am I connecting it to something that is super high stakes? Or am I talking about a range of opportunities and I'm emphasizing effort more than I am outcome? Because if you care about, and of course you do, your child's mental health and their performance, it is the second approach of applying those standards and expectations that will lead to better mental health and better performance. And you might think like, oh, I think the last time I asked my kid to rewrite a thank you note, I probably sounded like that first parent. Like, don't worry, you have not forever traumatized your child. But when it's your pattern over and over again, that's when it stirs up a lot of negative emotion. I'll play you one other contrasting example here.
Mom, why is everyone always talking about applying to Ivy League schools?
Well, there are just a few universities with international reputations. Unless you get into one of them, no one will care where you went to school or what you did there. It won't help you get a job. Success is all about reputation and pedigree.
Mom, why is everyone always talking about applying to Ivy League schools?
Well, Ivy League schools have international reputations for a reason, but there are other great schools out there. In the end, what you accomplish at school is far more important than its reputation. Success is about attitude and innovation.
So you see a really different approach. Like, I can't make this up. These are, I did make up the exact words, but I've heard dialogues like this over and over again. And when you start paying attention to them, the contrast is really striking. Both of these parents want their child to go to college, to have a good job, one that they love, whatever it might be. But when you framed it as, no one will care unless you do this, then you're impairing their mental health and their performance. And again, that's the paradox, is you're working at cross purposes to what your goals are. And the good news is, you can maintain those high standards and apply pressure, but do it in a healthy way that actually, makes a kid feel enthusiastic and understand that there are lots and lots of options and lots of different definitions of success. And I don't mean that just as a throwaway, like euphemism. Oh, there are a lot of definitions of success. When your child is achieving their potential and working hard, and if that's what you're emphasizing, it's really meaningful. So these are often the questions that people have. Do I have to lower my standards? The answer, of course, I've said over and over again, is no. If I change pressure, will it somehow diminish the kid's performance? No. If you change from unhealthy to healthy, it's going to get better. And then this last one is a little less intuitive, but I'll give you an example. I know what my child thinks and feels about how I apply pressure. How will you know? Because it's fun to look, as I said, at examples of other people's parenting, but how would you know how you're coming across? Or like whether your child wants a pep talk right before they do the thing that they're going to do. And specifically, like, how they interact with you, you get a sense of, are they annoyed or encouraged? And how would you get even more information about how you come across? Exactly. But I didn't start to do this until my kids were a little bit older. Like, I could have started sooner had I had that insight. No, but you can ask. So here's an example. These are my boys who are now 18 and 20, but in this, as you can see, they both play the violin. They were like 7 and 9. And my wife is a musician, and the boys expressed an early interest in music when we had one of our friends who's a professional violinist come stay with us for a week. The house was filled with beautiful music. Dacha, my older son, was 3. He wanted to play the violin. I'm like, uh-huh. So I went downstairs and I cut the shape of a violin from a recycled cardboard box and gave it to him with a chopstick. That's the bow. And he walked around the house, happy as a clam, didn't make a sound. I was so grateful. For about a day. And on the second day, he said, Tata, this violin is broken. And I said, oh, what happened? Like, do I need to go get the duct tape? I don't understand. He's like, no, it doesn't make a sound. Like, the gig is up. Like, this was fun for practice, but now I want one for real. So that began the epic journey of violins. But not until, they were older than this, probably 10 and 12, did I pause to think about what I might do even better as a parent. So I'll just kind of close with this story and then see what questions you might have. Typically, when they would do a recital, maybe once a year, they would finish Suzuki Book 4 or Book 5 or whatever it might be. I'm the AV guy, so I would be setting up the video camera in whatever the little venue was, which started out to be like our living room, and then borrow some rooms at school. And it was fun for them. They did well. They enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. My wife would always be, sort of off to the side, or when they were performing on a stage, actually, like backstage, giving them some last-minute instruction, helping them tune up the violin, and when they were 4, they did need help tuning up the violin, but certainly not when they were 10 or 12. But it wasn't until they were that age that I said to my wife, I said, Simo, we should ask what the boys need right before, they're practicing, right before they're ready to perform. And she said, what are you talking about? As if I was criticizing her not having provided the right backstage instruction or whatever. I said, no, that's not what I mean, but we should ask them how it feels, and she's a chemist, so whenever I say something really psychologist-y like that, like we should ask them how they feel, it's generally met with an eye roll, but then she acquiesces. But we sat down with the boys and said, all right, you know how like Mama's backstage with you right before, and I'm usually setting up the video camera, and like, how does that all feel, and what do you need? And they both it took you long enough to ask that question. And this is why I'm telling you, like, you can ask your kids the same thing about all kinds of different scenarios, and you'll get great data. Dacha, the older one, said, what I don't need, Mama, is all of the last-minute instruction about, remember, in the third movement, lots of vibrato in that second bar. Like, you always forget that, and you need to remember. And, he said, if I don't know it then, all of this last-minute reminder stuff just makes me more anxious. I want you backstage with me, but please don't say anything. Bring some water, because my mouth gets dry when I'm nervous, but unless I ask you for help, I just want you there. Like, okay, that was kind of sobering for both of us to hear, especially my wife. But she realized, like, okay, great, now I can be even more helpful. Now your performance is gonna be better. Now you're gonna be less anxious if I, am listening to the feedback that I'm getting. And Sava said the opposite. Well, not quite the opposite. He said, I like the last minute reminders, and I don't want any water, because then I'll have to pee while I'm performing. So, you get different answers from different kids, but you have to ask. I can give you the principles of the distinction between healthy and unhealthy pressure, but there's so many idiosyncrasies, you'll never know exactly how you're coming across unless you ask. And what one kid, feels is very helpful, and another child, even in the same family, might not. So there's no substitute for asking, and I ask all the time. I ask as a therapist, how does my approach feel to you? Is this useful? Like, student comes in for their second or third or fourth meeting, whatever it might be. So last week we talked about trying this. How did it go? So I don't presume that, my advice, just because it works in the research, is working for this particular person. And it takes some humility as a parent to ask that question and ask it repeatedly. But again, you get really, really good advice or feedback on your approach. I do have one more video that I'd love to show you. I know we're at time, but I think you'll really appreciate this. And then I will stay as long as anyone would like for questions. But there's a wonderful website, Asia May created this, ilovetowatchyouplay.com, and I'm just gonna play you an excerpt from some interviews that she did with kids that I think speak to all of the different comments really well.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All right, you guys ready?
I prefer that my parents, if I play bad, don't say anything. And if I play well, it doesn't really matter if they compliment me on how I play. I just I prefer my parents to, not talk as much.
I can hear them cheering me on, and I'm thinking in my head, just shut it, I'm trying to focus.
My mom yells in Spanish,
go, go, go. no. My mom usually says, use the backboard. You should use the backboard. I get angry because it annoys me. I'm kind of embarrassed. She tells me to get in the position that my coach told me not to get in. I'm like, well, no. And then she's like, get in your position. I'm like, no. I get a little tense when I have a certain score to get. And she's like, you gotta get that whatever score. And I'm like, I don't like it when they try to push me even more, even though I'm trying really, really hard. Coming from the coach's mouth is kind of better, I feel like, because your parents are there to support you and your coach is there to help you, you know? You just start screaming, Valentina, run faster, make a basket. But I just start going slower every time when she says that. The other people were like, wow, that mom is like really wanting her kid to win. In my inside, you can't see it, but I'm inside saying, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. Sometimes I just look into space. I try to listen to them and then do what they say to so they don't start yelling again. I don't really want them to give me that much advice because then I might forget it all. Sometimes I get nervous when they yell and nobody else is yelling. Sometimes it can embarrass me, like a lot. Wait. What's going on? We're just trying to do this, but you want us to try harder? Well, I am. I'm not going into a game not trying my hardest. That'd be like messed up. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure. Sometimes when they try to get the ball in basketball, you kind of think in your head that they're kind of like gonna push you and you're gonna fall and hurt yourself. They don't need to always be telling me what to do every minute of the game. They kind of just gotta let me play. I love when you say it really nice. I got it, Mom. I'd like to look back and I'd like to see you smile or give me a thumbs up. Mom, I wish you would be a little bit quieter. Say you play good and you couldn't get them next time. When they smile and say good job. Mom and Dad, thank you for loving me. I love being my supporter. When I'm upset, my mom and dad cheer me up.
Sometimes I forget about all the work that they do for me.
Be my biggest fan. We need a lot of love. I want you to know I need big hugs. I love the snacks that you bring me. It makes me happy when you always encourage me. Thank you, Mom and Dad. Please just be my mom and dad. Yep, that's it.
I had to share that because it's so much fun, right? And also speaks to what you said about the importance of having fun, right? And not everything that anyone does in life is fun, but some of the things are. And when they are, we can really savor them. Questions that you have, and I will also save copies of the book if you would like to buy one. You can also get it on Amazon, but cheaper here. And I'm just wondering what parts maybe didn't make sense or that you still have questions about or that I can answer. Take a few minutes because I bet your question might be one that someone else has, and then I want to be respectful of your time. As I said, I'll stay for as long as you would like and answer individual questions, but what's on your minds right now? Yes? Oh, when they say sorry, it's just that, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think I see that, it's a good question. I see that apology as the parent realizing this might not have been the time to do anything except drive or ask, is there anything you need before you head out? Rather than, offering some last minute advice. Now, importantly, and I guess it depends on how snarky the, thanks a lot is. I wouldn't use that opportunity to have a conversation with my child about their tone or their attitude, or if they said something even more rude. At that moment, I would let it go. But when they, got back from taking the standardized test or whatever it is, again, I encourage us all to uphold the standards that we have in our families and our communities, some of which is culturally mediated, as you said, and I'm respectful of all of that. And, if something about the intensity or rudeness or snarkiness of the comment didn't sit well with you, definitely address it, but probably not at that moment. Glad you asked. What else? Well, give it some thought, and if I can just leave you with one, sure. Questions about right. Oh, okay. Well, sort of two things there. Again, thank you for asking that. One is, I would say, if we're talking about sort of pre-performance questions, before the fall musical up here or before a standardized test, if you're asking questions and your child is reticent, I would take that as feedback that they want silence right now. They need to concentrate on their lines or their performance or, physics equations or whatever it might be. I would suggest, so that's how I would read that, is this isn't the time for questions. And you might even say out loud, it seems to me like this isn't the time for questions. Is there any way that I can, help right now? And just an open-ended question like that. But I think they're trying to communicate, this is starting to feel anxiety-provoking or overwhelming. The time to ask, how does my approach come across, is not before a performance, but in between performances, at some time when they're in a good mood, you're in a good mood, you're just spending time together, you're making cookies, you're taking a walk, you're washing the dog, whatever it might be. Say, I've been thinking about, your Irish step dancing and how much fun it was to, watch that last performance, or whatever it might be. And I just want to know, how does my approach come across? Because I was sort of replaying that one of the things that I have gotten in the habit of doing is, asking you to do the steps at home right before we get in the car to go to the competition. I don't know, is that like a helpful thing, a not helpful thing? But the time to ask for feedback about your approach, either generally or specifically in different things, like the morning of a test or something, is in a calm moment and not before, but at some point after, and that's when I think you'll find that your kids will open up. Well, sure. Yeah, so I'll say you might not have an answer to that question right now. You might need some time to think about that, but I've been rethinking the way that I'm trying to be supportive, and realizing that some of it might be helpful, some of it might not be helpful. And so take some time to think about it and let me know if there's something I can revise, delete, add, do differently. I'd really want to try that. And sort of leave it at that. Because it sometimes kids won't, I mean, my kids had like instant answers to the particular question about what they wanted to do in the 15 minutes before a recital. But they haven't always had instant answers to my open-ended questions about how I parent. And as I said, like it takes a lot of humility to ask, you know, how did I come across? Or was that helpful? Or was that not helpful? Or, you know, I mean, and I'm talking about recent examples too. Like, you know, I'll always be my kid's dad, even though they're 18 and 20 now. They're, you know, adults. My older son had 16 of his classmates over from college to spend Labor Day weekend at our house. They'd had like a couple days of classes, and then everyone had 3 days off, and you know, I'm an hour away from where they go to school, and it was still warm weather, and you know, it was great. Anyway, so the kids were all sitting around, and I was barbecuing, and there was a lot of laughter, and you know, the conversation turned to kids telling stories about their own youth. And instead of letting Dacha, my older son, tell one himself, I told one about Dacha when he was little, which I thought was hilarious. And so did my wife, and so did everyone else except for Dacha. So, and I don't know whether, I mean, it's different, right? The dynamic is different when it's your parent telling the story. But I kind of sensed that. And when Dacha and I were alone later that evening, like picking up dishes or something, I said, I'm guessing I should have let you pick and tell the story. And he was like, that was all right, but yeah, next time, right? And so asking for that feedback and getting an answer sounds different when your kid is 20, but I could have just let it go and hoped that it wasn't too embarrassing for him. And when I say it takes humility to ask, how are you doing as a parent? And I don't ask it about everything. I mean, there's not time, but also, you know, I'm just not inclined to, or I don't think to. But I was glad that I asked about it, not because I could go back in time and let him tell the story, but because I was showing some regard for how my behavior felt to him. And look, we all do things as parents and teachers and coaches and mentors that kids don't like how it makes them feel. You know, if you assign 50 pages of reading instead of 2 pages of reading, they're not going to feel as good about you or the assignment or anything else, but it might be what they need to do. And you do know better if you are the teacher and you've taught this class before. And so, you know, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying everything you do should feel good to your kids. But could a teacher ask, so, you know, how did everyone get through that reading? Like, honestly, did you make it through the 50 pages? Did you have to skim? Was it too much? Was it not enough? Did people keep reading because it was interesting and we should talk about the next chapter? You know, and again, you can't go back, and you might stand by your decision, and I would respect that. But it's very valuable to have that feedback, and sometimes it doesn't come right away. So I'm glad you asked that. Yes?
So my son is very good at cutting me off in class. He knows I'm going to ask a lot of questions and kind of gets ahead of him.
Talk to the hand, you get that?
So he was recently not accepted to a school that he was really interested in.
Yeah.
And instead of talking to his dad and I, he sent us a text. And he was like, I didn't get in. I'm fine. I don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, okay, does that mean not now? Like, do I let him kind of lead that conversation? I mean, eventually we're going to have to talk about it. I think he's okay about it, but, or do I just say, okay, he's okay and I trust,
A lot of times when people, not just related to college acceptance, but when they say they don't want to talk about it, I think the subtext is, until I've thought about it more. or until I've talked to somebody else about it, or until it doesn't sting as much, or whatever it might be. So maybe this was yesterday, maybe it was 2 months ago, but it's never, there's no statute of limitations on conversation. So if you have an insight about something you want to ask or say, it's never too late. So tomorrow, you could say to your son, I remember the text exchange, or the text you sent to me and Dad, I knew that you were disappointed, and so did Dad, and I also wanted to respect the fact that at least then you didn't want to talk about it, and you might still not want to talk about it. There's part of me, and I think Dad too, that does want to talk about it, or at least hear how it feels now, and so, we're listening, and sort of put the ball in his court. A lot of times I'll say to my kids, if they're clamming up and not wanting to talk, if you don't want to talk about it right now, or you don't, have, a clear idea of what you want to say, that's okay. But when you do, know that I will listen. And I think that's the most you can do, is put that invitation out there. I mean, you can try to coerce him to say something, but then, all parents can do that. But then our children are most likely to give us an answer that ends the conversation. I'm fine with it. I told you I was fine. So, all right, so now you've gotten some verbiage out of his mouth, but, that would be my advice. We got to give people the time and the space and remind them that we are there to listen. So I'll take one more question, and then thank you for, yeah. So the question is, how to use healthy pressure to motivate someone who's not necessarily performing at their best? The most powerful motivation is intrinsic, coming from inside, rather than hey, if you study harder for this next history test, I'll give you $1,000 or a new bicycle or whatever. And maybe they will, but it'll be short-lived, and they're not gonna have any great love of history. So I usually ask kids in that situation, if we're talking about homework, for example, I know that there's a lot of homework that feels like busy work, and then some homework is interesting. Tell me about a time when you were really interested in your homework, or in the work that was going on in class. Or if we're talking about a violin lesson, tell me about a time in one of your previous lessons when you really felt like you were learning a lot. And if they think about it, all kids can come up with something. Well, I liked the, bridge making project, or I liked the this or the that. And then ask, well, what about it did you like? Well, I liked that we got to build something, or I liked that it was great, or I liked that the teacher asked me, what are 3 different ways to play this passage, instead of just telling me how to do it. And, for a lot of people in general, but kids especially, it's about having some sense of agency, about contributing some creativity, about adding to the conversation, about putting an interpretation on it. And then, so get them to talk about what is intrinsically motivating. Is it something manual? Is it something creative? And then say, okay, how could you apply that to algebra? Because you're always saying, since kindergarten, you've said that your math teachers are all idiots. And they, maybe they have been, but maybe it's that there's something about algebra or math in general that you don't like. You like doing things with your hands. What could you do in your math class? It doesn't have to be something the whole class does, but in your studying or while you're taking notes in class that would tap into something that you enjoy, the drawing part, which would be easier if it were like geometry, but it doesn't have to be that. I mean, there's, all kinds of free software, for example, that, you can visualize functions and all kinds of cool stuff. But they have to, I'm always telling students who are complaining about or not feeling motivated to do X, Y, or Z, you don't have to be the passive recipient of this content. if there's a way you can take this content and transform it, apply it, work with it, study it in a way that is interesting to you, that's how you're going to learn the most, you know. So that's what I would try, you know, figure out what's already motivating to them. And a lot of parents will say, well, they just like playing video games. Okay, like that's a decent place to start. What is it about the video games? Well, think about it. You know, you can't progress to the next level till you master the first level. So, you know, they're rewarding in the sense that they'll, you know, tell you get another life or more points, like you get feedback instantly. I run into a lot of students at Exeter who are not motivated in classes where they're getting very little feedback. You know, they've been reading 3 different books for 6 weeks, and, you know, the teacher still hasn't handed back the essay that they wrote on the second week. So writing's not the only part of the class, but if they have no idea how they're doing, or another opportunity to improve, they're losing interest. So I will say to those kids, yeah, I will. All right. Thank you guys for being here tonight. This was a lot of fun for me. I hope it was for you. I really appreciate your being here. Thank you.